I kept silence for a little while, thinking of what Stroeve had told me. I could not stomach his weakness, and he saw my disapproval. You know as well as I do how Strickland lived, he said tremulously. I couldn't let her live in those circumstances. I simply couldn't. That's your business, I answered. What would you have done? He asked. She went with her eyes open. If she had to put up with certain inconveniences, it was her own lookout. Yes, but you see, you don't love her. Do you love her still? Oh, more than ever. Strickland isn't the man to make a woman happy. It can't last. I want her to know that I shall never fail her. Does that mean that you're prepared to take her back? I shouldn't hesitate. Why? She'll want me more than ever then. When she's alone and humiliated and broken, it would be dreadful if she had nowhere to go. He seemed to bear no resentment. I suppose it was commonplace in me that I felt slightly outraged at his lack of spirit. Perhaps he guessed what was in my mind, for he said, I couldn't expect her to love me as I loved her. I'm a buffoon. I'm not the sort of man that women love. I've always known that. I can't blame her if she's fallen in love with Strickland. You should know that. Fu Shiting has a family and a wife. They had an arranged marriage and won't divorce. I have known Brother Ting for so many years, and I've never seen him so devoted to any woman. This is true love. The two men speaking were Fu Shiting's usual buddies. When Ruan retracted her hand, her fingers digging into her palm, then a delicate voice floated out. You guys are just flattering me. What wife? I, by Jiqing, am just someone without a title. When Ruan's eyes darkened. So it was her, the rising star of the entertainment industry, the pure and innocent Bai Jiqing. You should know that. Fu Shiting has a family and a wife. They had an arranged marriage and won't divorce. But the bed I made up for myself was sufficiently uncomfortable to give me a wakeful night, and I thought a good deal of what the unlucky Dutchman had told me. I was not so much puzzled by Blanche Stroeve's action, for I saw in that merely the result of a physical appeal. I did not suppose she had ever really cared for her husband, and what I had taken for love was no more than the feminine response to caresses and comfort which in the minds of most women passes for it. It is a passive feeling capable of being roused for any object, as the vine can grow on any tree. And the wisdom of the world recognizes its strength when it urges a girl to marry the man who wants her with the assurance that love will follow. It is an emotion made up of the satisfaction and security, pride of property, the pleasure of being desired, the gratification of a household, and it is only by an amiable vanity that women ascribe to its spiritual value. It is an emotion which is defenseless against passion. I suspected that Blanche Stroeve's violent dislike of Strickland had in it from the beginning a vague element of sexual attraction. Who am I that I should seek to unravel the mysterious intricacies of sex? Perhaps Stroeve's passion excited without satisfying that part of her nature, and she hated Strickland because she felt in him the power to give her what she needed. I think she was quite sincere when she struggled against her husband's desire to bring him into the studio. I think she was frightened of him, though she knew not why, and I remembered how she had foreseen disaster. I think in some curious way the horror which she felt for him was a transference of the horror which she felt for herself, because he so strangely troubled her. His appearance was wild and uncouth. There was aloofness in his eyes and sensuality in his mouth. He was big and strong. He gave the impression of untamed passion, and perhaps she felt in him, too, that sinister element which had made me think of those wild beings of the world's early history when matter, retaining its early connection with the earth, seemed to possess yet a spirit of its own. If he affected her at all, it was inevitable that she should love or hate him. She hated him, and then I fancied that the daily intimacy with the sick man moved her strangely. She raised his head to give him food, and it was heavy against her hand. When she fed him, she wiped his sensual mouth and his red beard. She washed his limbs. They were covered with thick hair, and when she dried his hands, even in his weakness, they were strong and sinewy. His fingers were long. They were the capable, fashioning fingers of the artist, and I know not what troubling thoughts they excited in her. He slept very quietly, without a movement, so that he might have been dead, and he was like some wild creature of the woods, resting after a long chase, and she wondered what fancies passed through his dreams. Did he dream of the nymph flying through the woods of Greece with the satyr in hot pursuit? She fled, swift of foot and desperate, but he gained on her step by step, till she felt his hot breath on her cheek, and still she fled silently, and silently he pursued, and when at last he seized her, was it terror that thrilled her heart, or was it ecstasy? Blanche Stroeve was in the cruel grip of appetite. Perhaps she hated Strickland still, but she hungered for him, and everything that had made up her life till then became of no account. She ceased to be a woman, complex, kind, and petulant, considerate and thoughtless. She was a Maenad. She was desire. But perhaps this is very fanciful, and it may be that she was merely bored with her husband and went to Strickland out of a callous curiosity. She may have had no particular feeling for him, but succumbed to his wish from propinquity or idleness, to find then that she was powerless in a snare of her own contriving. How did I know what were the thoughts and emotions behind that placid brow and those cool gray eyes? But if one could be certain of nothing in dealing with creatures so incalculable as human beings, there were explanations of Blanche Strove's behavior, which were at all events plausible. On the other hand, I did not understand Strickland at all. I racked my brain, but could in no way account for an action so contrary to my conception of him. It was not strange that he should so heartlessly have betrayed his friend's confidence, nor that he hesitated not at all to gratify a whim at the cost of another's misery. That was in his character. He was a man without any conception of gratitude. He had no compassion. The emotions common to most of us simply did not exist in him, and it was as absurd to blame him for not feeling them as for blaming the tiger because he is fierce and cruel. But it was the whim I could not understand. I could not believe that Strickland had fallen in love with Blanche Strove. I did not believe him capable of love. That is an emotion in which tenderness is an essential part, but Strickland had no tenderness either for himself or for others. There is in love a sense of weakness, a desire to protect, and eagerness to do good and to give pleasure. If not unselfishness, at all events a selfishness which marvelously conceals itself. It has in it a certain diffidence. These were not traits which I could imagine in Strickland. Love is absorbing. It takes the lover out of himself. The most clear-sighted, though he may know, cannot realize that this love will cease. It gives body to what he knows is illusion, and, knowing it is nothing else, he loves it better than reality. It makes a man a little more than himself, and, at the same time, a little less. He ceases to be himself. He is no longer an individual, but a thing, an instrument to some purpose foreign to his ego. Love is never quite devoid of sentimentality, and Strickland was the least inclined to that infirmity of any man I have known. I could not believe that he would ever suffer that possession of himself which love is. He could never endure a foreign yoke. I believed him capable of uprooting from his heart, though it might be with agony, so that he was left battered and unsullied, anything that came between himself and that uncomprehended craving that urged him constantly to he knew not what. If I have succeeded at all in giving the complicated impression that Strickland made on me, it will not seem outrageous to say that I felt he was at once too great and too small for love. But I suppose that everyone's conception of the passion is formed on his own idiosyncrasies, and it is different with every different person. A man like Strickland would love in a manner peculiar to himself. It was vain to seek the analysis of his emotion. Next day, though I pressed him to remain, Strove left me. I offered to fetch his things from the studio, but he insisted on going himself. I think he hoped they had not thought of getting them together, so that he would have an opportunity of seeing his wife again and perhaps inducing her to come back to him. But he found his traps waiting for him in the porter's lodge, and the concierge told him that Blanche had gone out. I did not think he resisted the temptation of giving her an account of his troubles. I found that he was telling them to everyone he knew. He expected sympathy, but only excited ridicule. He bore himself most unbecomingly, knowing at what time his wife did her shopping. One day, unable any longer to bear not seeing her, he waylaid her in the street. She would not speak to him, but he insisted on speaking to her. He spluttered out words of apology for any wrong he had committed towards her. He told her he loved her devotedly and begged her to return to him. She would not answer. She walked hurriedly with averted face. I imagined him with his fat little legs, trying to keep up with her. Panting a little in his haste, he told her how miserable he was. He besought her to have mercy on him. He promised, if she would forgive him, to do everything she wanted. He offered to take her for a journey. He told her that Strickland would soon tire of her. When he repeated to me the whole sordid little scene, I was outraged. He had shown neither sense nor dignity. He had omitted nothing that could make his wife despise him. There is no cruelty greater than a woman's to a man who loves her and whom she does not love. She has no kindness then, no tolerance even. She has only an insane irritation. Blanche Strove stopped suddenly, and as hard as she could slapped her husband's face. She took advantage of his confusion to escape, and ran up the stairs to the studio. No word had passed her lips. When he told me this, he put his hand to his cheek, as though he still felt the smart of the blow, and in his eyes was a pain that was heart-rending and an amazement that was ludicrous. He looked like an overblown schoolboy, and though I felt so sorry for him, I could hardly help laughing. Then he took to walking along the street which she must pass through to get to the shops, and he would stand at the corner on the other side as she went along. He dared not speak to her again, but sought to put into his round eyes the appeal that was in his heart. I suppose he had some idea that the sight of his misery would touch her. She never made the smallest sign that she saw him. She never even changed the hour of her errands or sought an alternative route. I have an idea that there was some cruelty in her indifference. Perhaps she got enjoyment out of the torture she inflicted. I wondered why she hated him so much. I begged Strove to behave more wisely. His want of spirit was exasperating. You're doing no good at all by going on like this, I said. I think you'd have been wiser if you'd hit her over the head with a stick. She wouldn't have despised you as she does now. I suggested that he should go home for a while. He had often spoken to me of the silent town, somewhere up in the north of Holland, where his parents still lived. They were poor people. His father was a carpenter, and they dwelt in a little old red brick house, neat and clean, by the side of sluggish canal. The streets were wide and empty. For 200 years the place had been dying, but the houses had the homely stateliness of their time. Rich merchants, sending their wares to the distant Indies, had lived in them calm and prosperous lives, and in their decent decay they kept still an aroma of their splendid past. You could wander along the canal till you came to broad green fields, with windmills here and there, in which cattle, black and white, grazed lazily. I thought that amongst those surroundings, with their recollections of his boyhood, Dirk Strove would forget his unhappiness. But he would not go. I must be here when she needs me, he repeated. It would be dreadful if something terrible happened and I were not at hand. What do you think is going to happen? I asked. I don't know, but I'm afraid. I shrugged my shoulders. For all his pain, Dirk Strove remained a ridiculous object. He might have excited sympathy if he had grown worn and thin. He did nothing of the kind. He remained fat, and his round red cheeks shone like ripe apples. He had great neatness of person, and he continued to wear his spruce black coat and his bowler hat, always a little too small for him, in a dapper, jaunty manner. He was getting something of a paunch, and sorrow had no effect on it. He looked more than ever like a prosperous bagman. It is hard that a man's exterior should tally so little sometimes with his soul. Dirk Strove had the passion of Romeo in the body of Sir Toby Belch. He had a sweet and generous nature, and yet was always blundering. A real feeling for what was beautiful and the capacity to create only what was commonplace. A peculiar delicacy of sentiment and gross manners. He could exercise tact when dealing with the affairs of others, but none when dealing with his own. What a cruel practical joke old nature played when she flung so many contradictory elements together and left the man face to face with the perplexing callousness of the universe. I did not see Strickland for several weeks. I was disgusted with him, and if I had had an opportunity, should have been glad to tell him so. But I saw no object in seeking him out for the purpose. I'm a little shy of any assumption of moral indignation. There is always in it an element of self-satisfaction, which makes it awkward to anyone who has a sense of humor. It requires a very lively passion to steel me to my own ridicule. There was a sardonic sincerity in Strickland which made me sensitive to anything that might suggest a pose. But one evening, when I was passing along the Avenue de Clichy in front of the café which Strickland frequented and which I now avoided, I ran straight into him. He was accompanied by Blanche Strove, and they were just going to Strickland's favorite corner. "Where the devil have you been all this time?" said he. "I thought you must be away." His cordiality was proof that he knew I had no wish to speak to him. He was not a man with whom it was worth while wasting politeness. "No," I said, "I haven't been away. Why haven't you been here? There are more cafés in Paris than one, at which to trifle away an idle hour." Blanche then held out her hand and bade me good evening. I do not know why I had expected her to be somehow changed. She wore the same gray dress that she wore so often, neat and becoming, and her brow was as candid, her eyes as untroubled, as when I had been used to see her occupied with her household duties in the studio. "Come and have a game of chess," said Strickland. I did not know why at the moment I could think of no excuse. I followed them rather sulkily to the table at which Strickland always sat, and he called for the board and the chessmen. They both took the situation so much as a matter of course that I felt it absurd to do otherwise. Mrs. Strove watched the game with inscrutable face. She was silent, but she had always been silent. I looked at her mouth for an expression that could give me a clue to what she felt. I watched her eyes for some telltale flash, some hint of dismay or bitterness. I scanned her brow for any passing line that might indicate a settling emotion. Her face was a mask that told nothing. Her hands lay on her lap motionless, one in the other loosely clasped. I knew from what I had heard that she was a woman of violent passions, and that injurious blow that she had given Dirk, the man who had loved her so devotedly, betrayed a sudden temper and a horrid cruelty. She had abandoned the safe shelter of her husband's protection and the comfortable ease of a well-provided establishment for what she could not but see was an extreme hazard. It showed an eagerness for adventure, a readiness for the hand-to-mouth, which the care she took of her home and her love of good housewifery made not a little remarkable. She must be a woman of complicated character, and there was something dramatic in the contrast of that with her demure appearance. I was excited by the encounter, and my fancy worked busily while I sought to concentrate myself on the game I was playing. I always tried my best to beat Strickland, because he was a player who despised the opponent he vanquished. His exultation in victory made defeat more difficult to bear. On the other hand, if he was beaten, he took it with complete good humor. He was a bad winner and a good loser. Those who think that a man betrays his character nowhere more clearly than when he is playing a game might on this draw subtle inferences. When we had finished, I called the waiter to pay for the drinks and left them. The meeting had been devoid of incident. No word had been said to give me anything to think about, and any surmises I might make were unwarranted. I was intrigued. I could not tell how they were getting on. I would have given much to be a disembodied spirit, so that I could see them in the privacy of the studio and hear what they talked about. I had not the smallest indication on which to let my imagination work. 2 or 3 days later, Dirk Stroeve called on me. "I hear you've seen Blanche," he said. "How on earth did you find out?" "I was told by someone who saw you sitting with them." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I thought it would only pain you." "What do I care if it does? You must know that I want to hear the smallest thing about her." I waited for him to ask me questions. "What does she look like?" he said. "Absolutely unchanged." "Does she seem happy?" I shrugged my shoulders. "How can I tell? We were in a cafe. We were playing chess. I had no opportunity to speak to her." "Oh, but couldn't you tell by her face?" I shook my head. I could only repeat that by no word, by no hinted gesture, had she given an indication of her feelings. He must know better than I how great were her powers of self-control. He clasped his hands emotionally. "Oh, I'm so frightened. I know something is going to happen, something terrible, and I could do nothing to stop it." "What sort of thing?" I asked. "Oh, I don't know," he moaned, seizing his head with his hands. "I foresee some terrible catastrophe." Stroeve had always been excitable, but now he was beside himself. There was no reasoning with him. I thought it probable enough that Blanche Stroeve would not continue to find life with Strickland tolerable. But one of the falsest of proverbs is that you must lie on the bed that you have made. The experience of life shows that people are constantly doing things which must lead to disaster, and yet by some chance manage to evade the result of their folly. When Blanche quarreled with Strickland, she had only to leave him, and her husband was waiting humbly to forgive and forget. I was not prepared to feel any great sympathy for her. "You see, you don't love her," said Stroeve. "After all, there's nothing to prove that she is unhappy. For all we know, they may have settled down into a most domestic couple." Stroeve gave me a look with his woeful eyes. "Of course, it doesn't much matter to you, but to me it's so serious, so intensely serious." I was sorry if I'd seemed impatient or flippant. "Will you do something for me?" asked Stroeve. "Willingly. Will you write to Blanche for me?" "Why can't you write yourself?" "I've written over and over again." I didn't expect her to answer. "I don't think she reads the letters." "You make no account of feminine curiosity. Do you think she could resist?" "She could, mine." I looked at him quickly. He lowered his eyes. That answer of his seemed to me strangely humiliating. He was conscious that she regarded him with an indifference so profound that the sight of his handwriting would have not the slightest effect on her. "Do you really believe that she'll ever come back to you?" I asked. "I want her to know that if the worst comes to the worst, she can count on me. That's what I want you to tell her." I took a sheet of paper. "What is it exactly you wish me to say?" This is what I wrote. "Dear Mrs. Stroeve, Dirk wishes me to tell you that if at any time you want him, he will be grateful for the opportunity of being of service to you. He has no ill feeling towards you on account of anything that has happened. His love for you is unaltered. You will always find him at the following address: the Moon and Sixpence Ⅲ But though I was no less convinced than Stroeve that the connection between Strickland and Blanche would end disastrously, I did not expect the issue to take the tragic form it did. The summer came, breathless and sultry, and even at night there was no coolness to rest one's jaded nerves. The sun-baked streets seemed to give back the heat that had beat down on them during the day, and the passers-by dragged their feet along them wearily. I had not seen Strickland for weeks. Occupied with other things, I had ceased to think of him and his affairs. Dirk, with his vain lamentations, had begun to bore me, and I avoided his society. It was a sordid business, and I was not inclined to trouble myself with it further. One morning I was working. I sat in my pajamas. My thoughts wandered, and I thought of the sunny beaches of Brittany and the freshness of the sea. By my side was the empty bowl in which the concierge had brought me my café au lait and the fragment of croissant which I had not had appetite enough to eat. I heard the concierge in the next room emptying my bath. There was a tinkle at my bell, and I left her to open the door. In a moment, I heard Stroeve's voice asking if I was in. Without moving, I shouted to him to come. He entered the room quickly and came up to the table at which I sat. "She's killed herself," he said hoarsely. "What do you mean?" I cried, startled. He made movements with his lips as though he were speaking, but no sound issued from them. He gibbered like an idiot. My heart thumped against my ribs, and I did not know why. I flew into a temper. "For God's sake, collect yourself, man," I said. "What on earth are you talking about?" He made despairing gestures with his hands, but still no words came from his mouth. He might have been struck dumb. I do not know what came over me. I took him by the shoulders and shook him. Looking back, I am vexed that I made such a fool of myself. I suppose the last restless night had shaken my nerves more than I knew. "Let me sit down," he gasped at length. I filled a glass with St. Gamier and gave it to him to drink. I held it to his mouth, as though he were a child. He gulped down a mouthful, and some of it was spilt on his shirt front. "Who's killed herself?" I do not know why I asked, for I knew whom he meant. He made an effort to collect himself. "They had a row last night. He went away. Is she dead?" "No. They've taken her to the hospital." "Then what are you talking about?" I cried impatiently. "Why did you say she'd killed herself? Don't be cross with me. I can't tell you anything if you talk to me like that." I clenched my hands, seeking to control my irritation. I attempted to smile. "I'm sorry. Take your time. Don't hurry. There's a good fellow." His round blue eyes behind the spectacles were ghastly with terror. The magnifying glasses he wore distorted them. When the concierge went up this morning to take a letter, she could get no answer to her ring. She heard someone groaning. The door wasn't locked, and she went in. Blanche was lying on the bed. She'd been frightfully sick. There was a bottle of oxalic acid on the table. Stroeve hid his face in his hands and swayed backwards and forwards, groaning. Was she conscious? Yes. "Oh, if you knew how she's suffering." "I can't bear it. I can't bear it." His voice rose to a shriek. "Damn it all. You haven't got to bear it," I cried impatiently. "She's got to bear it. How can you be so cruel? What have you done?" They sent for a doctor and for me, and they told the police. I'd given the concierge 20 francs and told her to send for me if anything happened. He paused a minute, and I saw that what he had to tell me was very hard to say. When I went, she wouldn't speak to me. She told them to send me away. I swore that I forgave her everything, but she wouldn't listen. She tried to beat her head against the wall. The doctor told me that I mustn't remain with her. She kept on saying, "Send him away." I went and waited in the studio. And when the ambulance came and they put her on a stretcher, they made me go in the kitchen so that she shouldn't know I was there. While I dressed, for Stroeve wished me to go at once with him to the hospital. He told me that he had arranged for his wife to have a private room, so that she might at least be spared the sordid promiscuity of a ward. On our way, he explained to me why he desired my presence. If she still refused to see him, perhaps she would see me. He begged me to repeat to her that he loved her still. He would reproach her for nothing, but desired only to help her. He made no claim on her, and on her recovery would not seek to induce her to return to him. She would be perfectly free. But when we arrived at the hospital, a gaunt, cheerless building, the mere sight of which was enough to make one's heart sick, and after being directed from this official to that, up endless stairs and through long bare corridors, found the doctor in charge of the case. We were told that the patient was too ill to see anyone that day. The doctor was a little bearded man in white, with an offhand manner. He evidently looked upon a case as a case, and anxious relatives as a nuisance which must be treated with firmness. Moreover, to him the affair was commonplace. It was just a hysterical woman who had quarreled with her lover and taken poison. It was constantly happening. At first he thought that Dirk was the cause of the disaster, and he was needlessly brusque with him. When I explained that he was the husband, anxious to forgive, the doctor looked at him suddenly with curious, searching eyes. I seemed to see in them a hint of mockery. It was true that Stroeve had the head of the husband who was deceived. The doctor faintly shrugged his shoulders. "There is no immediate danger," he said, in answer to our questioning. "One doesn't know how much she took. It may be that she will get off with a fright. Women are constantly trying to commit suicide for love, but generally they take care not to succeed. It's generally a gesture to arouse pity or terror in their lover." There was in his tone a frigid contempt. It was obvious that to him Blanche Stroeve was only a unit to be added to the statistical list of attempted suicides in the city of Paris during the current year. He was busy and could waste no more time on us. He told us that if we came at a certain hour next day, should Blanche be better, it might be possible for her husband to see her. I scarcely know how we got through that day. Stroeve could not bear to be alone, and I exhausted myself in efforts to distract him. I took him to the Louvre, and he pretended to look at pictures, but I saw that his thoughts were constantly with his wife. I forced him to eat, and after luncheon I induced him to lie down, but he could not sleep. He accepted willingly my invitation to remain for a few days in my apartment. I gave him books to read, but after a page or two he would put the book down and stare miserably into space. During the evening we played innumerable games of piquet, and bravely, not to disappoint my efforts, he tried to appear interested. Finally, I gave him a draught, and he sank into uneasy slumber. When we went again to the hospital, we saw a nursing sister. She told us that Blanche seemed a little better, and she went in to ask if she would see her husband. We heard voices in the room in which she lay, and presently the nurse returned to say that the patient refused to see anyone. We had told her that if she refused to see Dirk, the nurse was to ask if she would see me, but this she refused also. Dirk's lips trembled. I dare not insist, said the nurse. She is too ill. Perhaps in a day or two, she may change her mind. Is there anyone else she wants to see? Asked Dirk, in a voice so low it was almost a whisper. She says she only wants to be left in peace. Dirk's hands moved strangely, as though they had nothing to do with his body, with a movement of their own. Will you tell her that if there is anyone else she wishes to see, I will bring him? I only want her to be happy. The nurse looked at him with her calm, kind eyes, which had seen all the horror and pain of the world, and yet, filled with the vision of a world without sin, remained serene. I will tell her when she is a little calmer. Dirk, filled with compassion, begged her to take the message at once. It may cure her. I beseech you to ask her now. With a faint smile of pity, the nurse went back into the room. We heard her low voice, and then, in a voice I did not recognize, the answer, no, no, no. The nurse came out again and shook her head. Was that she who spoke then? I asked. Her voice sounded so strange. It appears that her vocal cords have been burnt by the acid. Dirk gave a low cry of distress. I asked him to go on and wait for me at the entrance, for I wanted to say something to the nurse. He did not ask what it was, but went silently. He seemed to have lost all power of will. He was like an obedient child. Has she told you why she did it? I asked. No, she won't speak. She lies on her back, quite quietly. She doesn't move for hours at a time, but she cries always. Her pillow is all wet. She's too weak to use a handkerchief, and the tears just run down her face. It gave me a sudden wrench of the heartstrings. I could have killed Strickland then, and I knew that my voice was trembling when I bade the nurse goodbye. I found Dirk waiting for me on the steps. He seemed to see nothing, and did not notice that I had joined him till I touched him on the arm. We walked along in silence. I tried to imagine what had happened to drive the poor creature to that dreadful step. I presumed that Strickland knew what had happened, for someone must have been to see him from the police, and he must have made his statement. I did not know where he was. I supposed he had gone back to the shabby attic which served him as a studio. It was curious that she should not wish to see him. Perhaps she refused to have him sent for, because she knew he would refuse to come. I wondered what an abyss of cruelty she must have looked into that in horror she refused to live. The Moon and Sixpence Ⅲ the next week was dreadful. Stroeve went twice a day to the hospital to inquire after his wife, who still declined to see him, and came away at first relieved and hopeful, because he was told that she seemed to be growing better, and then in despair because the complication which the doctor had feared having ensued, recovery, was impossible. The nurse was pitiful to his distress, but she had little to say that could console him. The poor woman lay quite still, refusing to speak, with her eyes intent, as though she watched for the coming of death. It could now be only the question of a day or two, and when, late one evening, Stroeve came to see me, I knew it was to tell me she was dead. He was absolutely exhausted. His volubility had left him at last, and he sank down wearily on my sofa. I felt that no words of condolence availed, and I let him lie there quietly. I feared he would think it heartless if I read, so I sat by my window, smoking a pipe, till he felt inclined to speak. You've been very kind to me, he said at last. Everyone's been very kind. Nonsense, I said, a little embarrassed. At the hospital they told me I might wait. They gave me a chair, and I sat outside the door. When she became unconscious, they said I might go in. Her mouth and chin were all burnt by the acid. It was awful to see her lovely skin all wounded. She died very peacefully, so that I didn't know she was dead till the sister told me. He was too tired to weep. He lay on his back limply, as though all the strength had gone out of his limbs, and presently I saw that he had fallen asleep. It was the first natural sleep he had had for a week. Nature, sometimes so cruel, is sometimes merciful. I covered him and turned down the light. In the morning when I awoke, he was still asleep. He had not moved. His gold-rimmed spectacles were still on his nose. The circumstances of Blanche Stroeve's death necessitated all manner of dreadful formalities, but at last we were allowed to bury her. Dirk and I alone followed the hearse to the cemetery. We went at a foot pace, but on the way back we trotted, and there was something to my mind singularly horrible in the way the driver of the hearse whipped up his horses. It seemed to dismiss the dead with a shrug of the shoulders. Now and then I caught sight of the swaying hearse in front of us, and our own driver urged his pair so that we might not remain behind. I felt in myself, too, the desire to get the whole thing out of my mind. I was beginning to be bored with a tragedy that did not really concern me, and pretending to myself that I spoke in order to distract Stroeve, I turned with relief to other subjects. Don't you think you'd better go away for a bit? I said. There can be no object in your staying in Paris now. He did not answer, but I went on ruthlessly. Have you made any plans for the immediate future? No. You must try and gather the threads again. Why don't you go down to Italy and start working? Again he made no reply, but the driver of our carriage came to my rescue. Slackening his pace for a moment, he leaned over and spoke. I could not hear what he said, so I put my head out of the window. He wanted to know where we wished to be set down. I told him to wait a minute. You'd better come and have lunch with me, I said to Dirk. I'll tell him to drop us in the place Pigalle. I'd rather not. I want to go to the studio. I hesitated a moment. Would you like me to come with you? I asked then. No, I should prefer to be alone. All right. I gave the driver the necessary direction, and in renewed silence we drove on. Dirk had not been to the studio since the wretched morning on which they had taken Blanche to the hospital. I was glad he did not want me to accompany him, and when I left him at the door, I walked away with relief. I took a new pleasure in the streets of Paris, and I looked with smiling eyes at the people who hurried to and fro. The day was fine and sunny, and I felt in myself a more acute delight in life. I cannot help it. I put Stroeve and his sorrows out of my mind. I wanted to enjoy. The Moon and Sixpence Ⅲ I did not see him again for nearly a week. Then he fetched me soon after 7 one evening and took me out to dinner. He was dressed in the deepest mourning, and on his bowler was a broad black band. He had even a black border to his handkerchief. His garb of woe suggested that he had lost in one catastrophe every relation he had in the world, even to cousins by marriage twice removed. His plumpness and his red, fat cheeks made his mourning not a little incongruous. It was cruel that his extreme unhappiness should have in it something of buffoonery. He told me he had made up his mind to go away, though not to Italy, as I had suggested, but to Holland. I'm starting tomorrow. This is perhaps the last time we shall ever meet. I made an appropriate rejoinder, and he smiled wanly. I haven't been home for 5 years. I think I'd forgotten it all. I seem to have come so far away from my father's house that I was shy at the idea of revisiting it. But now I feel it's my only refuge. He was sore and bruised, and his thoughts went back to the tenderness of his mother's love. The ridicule he had endured for years seemed now to weigh him down, and the final blow of Blanche's treachery had robbed him of the resiliency which had made him take it so gaily. He could no longer laugh with those who laughed at him. He was an outcast. He told me of his childhood in the tidy brick house, and of his mother's passionate orderliness. Her kitchen was a miracle of clean brightness. Everything was always in its place, and nowhere could you see a speck of dust. Cleanliness, indeed, was a mania with her. I saw a neat little old woman, with cheeks like apples, toiling away from morning to night, through the long years, to keep her house trim and spruce. His father was a spare old man, his hands gnarled after the work of a lifetime, silent and upright. In the evening he read the paper aloud, while his wife and daughter, now married to the captain of a fishing smack, unwilling to lose a moment, bent over their sewing. Nothing ever happened in that little town, left behind by the advance of civilization, and 1 year followed the next till death came, like a friend, to give rest to those who had labored so diligently. My father wished me to become a carpenter, like himself. 4 or 5 generations we've carried on the same trade, from father to son. Perhaps that is the wisdom of life, to tread in your father's steps, and look neither to the right nor to the left. When I was a little boy, I said I would marry the daughter of the harness maker who lived next door. She was a little girl with blue eyes and a flaxen pigtail. She would have kept my house like a new pin, and I should have had a son to carry on the business after me. Stroeve sighed a little and was silent. His thoughts dwelt among pictures of what might have been, and the safety of a life he had refused filled him with longing. The world is hard and cruel. We are here none knows why, and we go none knows whither. We must be very humble. We must see the beauty of quietness. We must go through life so inconspicuously that fate does not notice us. And let us seek the love of simple, ignorant people. Their ignorance is better than all our knowledge. Let us be silent, content in our little corner, meek and gentle like them. That is the wisdom of life. To me, it was his broken spirit that expressed itself, and I rebelled against his renunciation. But I kept my own counsel. What made you think of being a painter? I asked. He shrugged his shoulders. It happened that I had a knack for drawing. I got prizes for it at school. My poor mother was very proud of my gift, and she gave me a box of watercolors as a present. She showed my sketches to the pastor and the doctor and the judge. They sent me to Amsterdam to try for scholarship, and I won it. Poor soul, she was so proud, and though it nearly broke her heart to part from me, she smiled and would not show me her grief. She was pleased that her son should be an artist. They pinched and saved so that I should have enough to live on, and when my first picture was exhibited, they came to Amsterdam to see it, my father and mother and my sister, and my mother cried when she looked at it. His kind eyes glistened, and now on every wall of the old house, there's one of my pictures in a beautiful gold frame. He glowed with happy pride. I thought of those cold scenes of his, with their picturesque peasants and cypresses and olive trees. They must look queer in their garish frames on the walls of the peasant house. The dear soul thought she was doing a wonderful thing for me when she made me an artist. But perhaps, after all, it would have been better for me if my father's will had prevailed and I were now but an honest carpenter. Now that you know what art can offer, would you change your life? Would you have missed all the delight it has given you. Art is the greatest thing in the world, he answered after a pause. He looked at me for a minute reflectively. He seemed to hesitate. Then he said, "Did you know that I had been to see Strickland?" "You?" I was astonished. I should have thought he could not bear to set eyes on him. Stroeve smiled faintly. "You know already that I have no proper pride." "What do you mean by that?" He told me a singular story. When I left him, after we had buried poor Blanche, Stroeve walked into the house with a heavy heart. Something impelled him to go to the studio, some obscure desire for self-torture, and yet he dreaded the anguish that he foresaw. He dragged himself up the stairs. His feet seemed unwilling to carry him, and outside the door he lingered for a long time, trying to summon up courage to go in. He felt horribly sick. He had an impulse to run down the stairs after me and beg me to go in with him. He had a feeling that there was somebody in the studio. He remembered how often he had waited for a minute or two on the landing to get his breath after the ascent, and how absurdly his impatience to see Blanche had taken it away again. To see her was a delight that never staled, and even though he had not been out an hour, he was as excited at the prospect as if they had been parted for a month. Suddenly, he could not believe that she was dead. What had happened could only be a dream, a frightful dream. And when he turned the key and opened the door, he would see her bending slightly over the table in the gracious attitude of the woman in Chardin's Benedicite, which always seemed to him so exquisite. Hurriedly, he took the key out of his pocket, opened, and walked in. The apartment had no look of desertion. His wife's tidiness was one of the traits which had so much pleased him. His own upbringing had given him a tender sympathy for the delight in orderliness. And when he had seen her instinctive desire to put each thing in its appointed place, it had given him a little warm feeling in his heart. The bedroom looked as though she had just left it. The brushes were neatly placed on the toilet table, one on each side of the comb. Someone had smoothed down the bed on which she had spent her last night in the studio, and her nightdress in a little case lay on the pillow. It was impossible to believe that she would never come into that room again. But he felt thirsty and went into the kitchen to get himself some water. Here, too, was order. On a rack were the plates that she had used for dinner on the night of her quarrel with Strickland, and they had been carefully washed. The knives and forks were put away in a drawer. Under a cover were the remains of a piece of cheese, and in a tin box was a crust of bread. She had done her marketing from day to day, buying only what was strictly needful, so that nothing was left over from one day to the next. Stroeve knew from the inquiries made by the police that Strickland had walked out of the house immediately after dinner, and the fact that Blanche had washed up the things as usual gave him a little thrill of horror. Her methodicalness made her suicide more deliberate. Her self-possession was frightening. A sudden pang seized him, and his knees felt so weak that he almost fell. He went back into the bedroom and threw himself on the bed. He cried out her name, "Blanche, Blanche." The thought of her suffering was intolerable. He had a sudden vision of her standing in the kitchen. It was hardly larger than a cupboard, washing the plates and glasses, the forks and spoons, giving the knives a rapid polish on a knife board, then putting everything away, giving the sink a scrub, and hanging the dishcloth up to dry. It was there still, a gray, torn rag. Then looking round to see that everything was clean and nice. He saw her roll down her sleeves and remove her apron. The apron hung on a peg behind the door, and take the bottle of oxalic acid and go with it into the bedroom. The agony of it drove him up from the bed and out of the room. He went into the studio. It was dark, for the curtains had been drawn over the great window, and he pulled them quickly back. But a sob broke from him as with a rapid glance he took in the place where he had been so happy. Nothing was changed here either. Strickland was indifferent to his surroundings, and he had lived in the other studio without thinking of altering a thing. It was deliberately artistic. It represented Stroeve's idea of the proper environment for an artist. There were bits of old brocade on the walls, and the piano was covered with a piece of silk, beautiful and tarnished. In one corner was a copy of the Venus of Milo, and in another of the Venus of the Medici. Here, and there was an Italian cabinet surmounted with Delft, and here and there a bas-relief. In a handsome gold frame was a copy of Velasquez's Innocent X that Stroeve had made in Rome, and placed so as to make the most of their decorative effect were a number of Stroeve's pictures, all in splendid frames. Stroeve had always been very proud of his taste. He had never lost his appreciation for the romantic atmosphere of his studio, and though now the sight of it was like a stab at his heart, without thinking what he was at, he changed slightly the position of a Louis XV table, which was one of his treasures. Suddenly he caught sight of a canvas with its face to the wall. It was a much larger one than he himself was in the habit of using, and he wondered what it did there. He went over to it and leaned it towards him so that he could see the painting. It was a nude. His heart began to beat quickly, for he guessed at once that it was one of Strickland's pictures. He flung it back against the wall angrily. What did he mean by leaving it there? But his movement caused it to fall face downward on the ground. No matter whose the picture, he could not leave it there in the dust, and he raised it, but then curiosity got the better of him. He thought he would like to have a proper look at it, so he brought it along and set it on the easel. Then he stood back in order to see it at his ease. He gave a gasp. It was the picture of a woman lying on a sofa, with one arm beneath her head and the other along her body. One knee was raised, and the other leg was stretched out. The pose was classic. Strove's head swam. It was Blanche. Grief and jealousy and rage seized him, and he cried out hoarsely. He was inarticulate. He clenched his fists and raised them threateningly at an invisible enemy. He screamed at the top of his voice. He was beside himself. He could not bear it. That was too much. He looked round wildly for some instrument. He wanted to hack the picture to pieces. It should not exist another minute. He could see nothing that would serve his purpose. He rummaged about his painting things. Somehow, he could not find a thing. He was frantic. At last he came upon what he sought, a large scraper, and he pounced on it with a cry of triumph. He seized it as though it were a dagger and ran to the picture. As Strove told me this, he became as excited as when the incident occurred, and he took hold of a dinner knife on the table between us and brandished it. He lifted his arm as though to strike, and then, opening his hand, let it fall with a clatter to the ground. He looked at me with a tremulous smile. He did not speak. "Fire away," I said. I don't know what happened to me. I was just going to make a great hole in the picture. I had my arm all ready for the blow, when suddenly I seemed to see it. See what? The picture. It was a work of art. I couldn't touch it. I was afraid. Strove was silent again, and he stared at me with his mouth open and his round blue eyes starting out of his head. It was a wonderful picture. I was seized with awe. I had nearly committed a dreadful crime. I moved a little to see it better, and my foot knocked against the scraper. I shuddered. I really felt something of the emotion that had caught him. I was strangely impressed. It was as though I were suddenly transported into a world in which the values were changed. I stood by, at a loss, like a stranger in a land where the reactions of man to familiar things are all different from those he has known. Strove tried to talk to me about the picture, but he was incoherent, and I had to guess at what he meant. Strickland had burst the bonds that hitherto had held him. He had found, not himself, as the phrase goes, but a new soul with unsuspected powers. It was not only the bold simplification of the drawing, which showed so rich and so singular a personality. It was not only the painting, though the flesh was painted with a passionate sensuality which had in it something miraculous. It was not only the solidity, so that you felt extraordinarily the weight of the body. There was also a spirituality, troubling and new, which led the imagination along unsuspected ways, and suggested dim, empty spaces, lit only by the eternal stars, where the soul, all naked, adventured fearful to the discovery of new mysteries. If I am rhetorical, it was because Strove was rhetorical. Do we not know that man in moments of emotion expresses himself naturally in the terms of a novelette? Strove was trying to express a feeling which he had never known before, and he did not know how to put it into common terms. He was like the mystic seeking to describe the ineffable. But one fact was made clear to me. People talk of beauty lightly, and having no feeling for words, they use that one carelessly, so that it loses its force. And the thing it stands for, sharing its name with 100 trivial objects, is deprived of dignity. They call beautiful a dress, a dog, a sermon, and when they're face to face with beauty, cannot recognize it. The false emphasis with which they try to deck their worthless thoughts blunts their susceptibilities. Like the charlatan who counterfeits a spiritual force he has sometimes felt, they lose the power they have abused. But Strove, the unconquerable buffoon, had a love and an understanding of beauty which were as honest and sincere as was his own sincere and honest soul. It meant to him what God means to the believer, and when he saw it he was afraid. What did you say to Strickland when you saw him? I asked him to come with me to Holland. I was dumbfounded. I could only look at Strove in stupid amazement. We both loved Blanche. There would have been room for him in my mother's house. I think the company of poor, simple people would have done his soul a great good. I think he might have learnt from them something that would be very useful to him. What did he say? He smiled a little. I suppose he thought me very silly. He said he had other fish to fry. I could have wished that Strickland had used some other phrase to indicate his refusal. He gave me the picture of Blanche. I wondered why Strickland had done that. But I made no remark, and for some time we kept silence. What have you done with all your things? I said at last. I got a Jew in, and he gave me a round sum for the lot. I'm taking my pictures home with me. Besides them, I own nothing in the world now but a box of clothes and a few books. I'm glad you're going home, I said. I felt that his chance was to put all the past behind him. I hoped that the grief which now seemed intolerable would be softened by the lapse of time, and merciful forgetfulness would help him to take up once more the burden of life. He was young still. In a few years he would look back on all his misery with a sadness in which there would be something not unpleasurable. Sooner or later he would marry some honest soul in Holland, and I felt sure he would be happy. I smiled at the thought of the vast number of bad pictures he would paint before he died. Next day, I saw him off for Amsterdam. The Moon and Sixpence XL for the next month. Occupied with my own affairs, I saw no one connected with this lamentable business, and my mind ceased to be occupied with it. But one day, when I was walking along, bent on some errand, I passed Charles Strickland. The sight of him brought back to me all the horror which I was not unwilling to forget, and I felt in me a sudden repulsion for the cause of it. Nodding, for it would have been childish to cut him, I walked on quickly, but in a minute I felt a hand on my shoulder. "You're in a great hurry," he said cordially. It was characteristic of him to display geniality with anyone who showed a disinclination to meet him, and the coolness of my greeting can have left him in little doubt of that. "I am," I answered briefly. "I'll walk along with you," he said. "Why?" I asked. "For the pleasure of your society." I did not answer, and he walked by my side silently. We continued thus for perhaps a quarter of a mile. I began to feel a little ridiculous. At last we passed the stationer's, and it occurred to me that I might as well buy some paper. It would be an excuse to be rid of him. "I'm going in here," I said. "Goodbye. I'll wait for you." I shrugged my shoulders and went into the shop. I reflected that French paper was bad, and that, foiled of my purpose, I need not burden myself with a purchase I did not need. I asked for something I knew could not be provided, and in a minute came out into the street. "Did you get what you wanted?" he asked. "No." We walked on in silence, and then came to a place where several streets met. I stopped at the curb. "Which way do you go?" I inquired. "Your way," he smiled. "I'm going home. I'll come along with you and smoke a pipe." "You might wait for an invitation," I retorted frigidly. "I would if I thought there was any chance of getting one." "Do you see that wall in front of you?" I said, pointing. "Yes." "In that case, I should have thought you could see also that I don't want your company." I vaguely suspected it, I confess. I cannot help but chuckle. It is one of the defects of my character that I cannot altogether dislike anyone who makes me laugh. But I pull myself together. "I think you're detestable. You're the most loathsome beast that it's ever been my misfortune to meet. Why do you seek the society of someone who hates and despises you?" "My dear fellow, what the hell do you suppose I care what you think of me?" "Damn it all," I said, more violently because I had an inkling my motive was none too creditable. "I don't want to know you. Are you afraid I shall corrupt you?" His tone made me feel not a little ridiculous. I knew that he was looking at me sideways, with a sardonic smile. "I suppose you are hard up," I remarked insolently. "I should be a damned fool if I thought I had any chance of borrowing money from you. You've come down in the world if you can bring yourself to flatter." He grinned. "You'll never really dislike me, so long as I give you the opportunity to get off a good thing now and then." I had to bite my lip to prevent myself from laughing. What he said had a hateful truth in it, and another defect of my character is that I enjoy the company of those, however depraved, who can give me a Roland for my Oliver. I began to feel that my abhorrence for Strickland could only be sustained by an effort on my part. I recognized my moral weakness, but saw that my disapprobation had in it already something of a pose, and I knew that if I felt it, his own keen instinct had discovered it too. He was certainly laughing at me up his sleeve. I left him the last word, and sought refuge in a shrug of the shoulders and taciturnity. We arrived at the house in which I lived. I would not ask him to come in with me, but walked up the stairs without a word. He followed me, and entered the apartment on my heels. He had not been in it before, but he never gave a glance at the room I had been at pains to make pleasing to the eye. There was a tin of tobacco on the table, and, taking out his pipe, he filled it. He sat down on the only chair that had no arms and tilted himself on the back legs. "If you're going to make yourself at home, why don't you sit in an armchair?" I asked irritably. "Why are you concerned about my comfort?" "I'm not," I retorted, "but only about my own. It makes me uncomfortable to see someone sit on an uncomfortable chair." He chuckled but did not move. He smoked on in silence, taking no further notice of me, and apparently was absorbed in thought. I wondered why he had come. Until long habit has blunted the sensibility, there is something disconcerting to the writer in the instinct which causes him to take an interest in the singularities of human nature, so absorbing that his moral sense is powerless against it. He recognizes in himself an artistic satisfaction in the contemplation of evil, which a little startles him. But sincerity forces him to confess that the disapproval he feels for certain actions is not nearly so strong as his curiosity in their reasons. The character of a scoundrel, logical and complete, has a fascination for his creator, which is an outrage to law and order. I expect that Shakespeare devised Iago with a gusto which he never knew when, weaving moonbeams with his fancy, he imagined Desdemona. It may be that in his rogues the writer gratifies instincts deep-rooted in him, which the manners and customs of a civilized world have forced back to the mysterious recesses of the subconscious. In giving to the character of his invention flesh and bones, he is giving life to that part of himself which finds no other means of expression. His satisfaction is a sense of liberation. The writer is more concerned to know than to judge. There was in my soul a perfectly genuine horror of Strickland, and side by side with it a cold curiosity to discover his motives. I was puzzled by him, and I was eager to see how he regarded the tragedy he had caused in the lives of people who had used him with so much kindness. I applied the scalpel boldly. Stroeve told me that picture you painted of his wife was the best thing you've ever done. Strickland took his pipe out of his mouth, and a smile lit up his eyes. It was great fun to do. Why did you give it him? I'd finished it. It wasn't any good to me. Do you know that Stroeve nearly destroyed it? It wasn't altogether satisfactory. He was quiet for a moment or two, then he took his pipe out of his mouth again and chuckled. Do you know that the little man came to see me? Weren't you rather touched by what he had to say? No, I thought it damned silly and sentimental. I suppose it escaped your memory that you'd ruined his life? I remarked. He rubbed his bearded chin reflectively. He's a very bad painter, but a very good man. And an excellent cook, Strickland added derisively. His callousness was inhuman, and in my indignation I was not inclined to mince my words. As a mere matter of curiosity, I wish you'd tell me. Have you felt the smallest twinge of remorse for Blanche Stroeve's death? I watched his face for some change of expression, but it remained impassive. Why should I, he asked. Let me put the facts before you. You were dying, and Dirk Stroeve took you into his own house. He nursed you like a mother. He sacrificed his time and his comfort and his money for you. He snatched you from the jaws of death. Strickland shrugged his shoulders. The absurd little man enjoys doing things for other people. That's his life. Granting that you owed him no gratitude, were you obliged to go out of your way to take his wife from him? Until you came on the scene, they were happy. Why couldn't you leave them alone? What makes you think they were happy? It was evident. You are a discerning fellow. Do you think she could ever have forgiven him for what he did for her? What do you mean by that? Don't you know why he married her? I shook my head. She was a governess in the family of some Roman prince, and the son of the house seduced her. She thought he was going to marry her. They turned her out into the street neck and crop. She was going to have a baby, and she tried to commit suicide. Stroeve found her and married her. It was just like him. I never knew anyone with so compassionate a heart. I had often wondered why that ill-assorted pair had married, but just that explanation had never occurred to me. That was perhaps the cause of the peculiar quality of Dirk's love for his wife. I had noticed in it something more than passion. I remembered also how I had always fancied that her reserve concealed I knew not what, but now I saw in it more than the desire to hide a shameful secret. Her tranquility was like the sullen calm that broods over an island which has been swept by a hurricane. Her cheerfulness was the cheerfulness of despair. Strickland interrupted my reflections with an observation, the profound cynicism of which startled me. A woman can't forgive a man for the harm he does her, he said, but she can never forgive him for the sacrifices he makes on her account. It must be reassuring to you to know that you certainly run no risk of incurring the resentment of the women you come in contact with, I retorted. A slight smile broke on his lips. You are always prepared to sacrifice your principles for a repartee, he answered. What happened to the child? Oh, it was stillborn, 3 or 4 months after they were married. Then I came to the question which had seemed to me most puzzling. Will you tell me why you bothered about Blanche Stroeve at all? He did not answer for so long that I nearly repeated it. How do I know? He said at last. She couldn't bear the sight of me. It amused me. I see. He gave a sudden flash of anger. Damn it all, I wanted her. But he recovered his temper immediately and looked at me with a smile. At first she was horrified. Did you tell her? There wasn't any need. She knew. I never said a word. She was frightened. At last I took her. I do not know what there was in the way he told me this that extraordinarily suggested the violence of his desire. It was disconcerting and rather horrible. His life was strangely divorced from material things, and it was as though his body at times wreaked a fearful revenge on his spirit. The satyr in him suddenly took possession, and he was powerless in the grip of an instinct which had all the strength of the primitive forces of nature. It was an obsession so complete that there was no room in his soul for prudence or gratitude. But why did you want to take her away with you? I asked. I didn't, he answered, frowning. When she said she was coming, I was nearly as surprised as Stroeve. I told her that when I'd had enough of her, she'd have to go, and she said she'd risk that. He paused a little. She had a wonderful body, and I want to paint a nude. When I'd finished my picture, I took no more interest in her. And she loved you with all her heart. He sprang to his feet and walked up and down the small room. I don't want love. I haven't time for it. It's weakness. I am a man, and sometimes I want a woman. When I've satisfied my passion, I'm ready for other things. I can't overcome my desire, but I hate it. It imprisons my spirit. I look forward to the time when I shall be free from all desire and can give myself without hindrance to my work. Because women can do nothing except love, they've given it a ridiculous importance. They want to persuade us that it's the whole of life. It's an insignificant part. I know lust. That's normal and healthy. Love is a disease. Women are the instruments of my pleasure. I have no patience with their claim to be helpmates, partners, companions. I had never heard Strickland speak so much at one time. He spoke with a passion of indignation. But neither here nor elsewhere do I pretend to give his exact words. His vocabulary was small, and he had no gift for framing sentences, so that one had to piece his meaning together out of interjections, the expression of his face, gestures, and hackneyed phrases. You should have lived at a time when women were chattels and men the masters of slaves, I said. It just happens that I am a completely normal man. I could not help laughing at this remark, made in all seriousness, but he went on, walking up and down the room like a caged beast, intent on expressing what he felt, but found such difficulty in putting coherently. When a woman loves you, she's not satisfied until she possesses your soul. Because she's weak, she has a rage for domination, and nothing less will satisfy her. She has a small mind, and she resents the abstract which she is unable to grasp. She is occupied with material things, and she is jealous of the ideal. The soul of man wanders through the uttermost regions of the universe, and she seeks to imprison it in the circle of her account book. Do you remember my wife? I saw Blanche little by little trying all her tricks. With infinite patience, she prepared to snare me and bind me. She wanted to bring me down to her level. She cared nothing for me. She only wanted me to be hers. She was willing to do everything in the world for me except the one thing I wanted, to leave me alone. I was silent for a while. What did you expect her to do when you left her? She could have gone back to Shrove, he said irritably. He was ready to take her. You're inhuman, I answered. It's as useless to talk to you about these things as to describe colors to a man who was born blind. He stopped in front of my chair and stood looking down at me with an expression in which I read a contemptuous amazement. Do you really care a twopenny damn if Blanche Shrove is alive or dead? I thought over his question, for I wanted to answer it truthfully, at all events to my soul. It may be a lack of sympathy in myself if it does not make any great difference to me that she is dead. Life had a great deal to offer her. I think it's terrible that she should have been deprived of it in that cruel way, and I am ashamed because I do not really care. You have not the courage of your convictions. Life has no value. Blanche Shrove didn't commit suicide because I left her, but because she was a foolish and unbalanced woman. But we've talked about her quite enough. She was an entirely unimportant person. Come, and I'll show you my pictures. He spoke as though I were a child that needed to be distracted. I was sore, but not with him so much as with myself. I thought of the happy life that Père had led in the cozy studio in Montmartre, Shrove and his wife, their simplicity, kindness, and hospitality. It seemed to me cruel that it should have been broken to pieces by a ruthless chance. But the cruelest thing of all was that in fact it made no great difference. The world went on, and no one was a penny the worse for all that wretchedness. I had an idea that Dirk, a man of greater emotional reactions and depth of feeling, would soon forget, and Blanche's life, begun with who knows what bright hopes and what dreams, might just as well have never been lived. It all seemed useless and inane. Strickland had found his hat and stood looking at me. Are you coming? Why do you seek my acquaintance? I asked him. You know that I hate and despise you. He chuckled good-humoredly. Your only quarrel with me really is that I don't care a twopenny damn what you think about me. I felt my cheeks grow red with sudden anger. It was impossible to make him understand that one might be outraged by his callous selfishness. I longed to pierce his armor of complete indifference. I knew also that in the end there was truth in what he said. Unconsciously, perhaps, we treasure the power we have over people by their regard for our opinion of them, and we hate those upon whom we have no such influence. I suppose it is the bitterest wound to human pride. But I would not let him see that I was put out. Is it possible for any man to disregard others entirely? I said, though more to myself than to him. You're dependent on others for everything in existence. It's a preposterous attempt to try to live only for yourself and by yourself. Sooner or later you'll be ill and tired and old, and then you'll crawl back into the herd. Won't you be ashamed when you feel in your heart the desire for comfort and sympathy? You're trying an impossible thing. Sooner or later, the human being in you will yearn for the common bonds of humanity. Come and look at my pictures. Have you ever thought of death? Why should I? It doesn't matter. I stared at him. He stood before me, motionless, with a mocking smile in his eyes. But for all that, for a moment, I had an inkling of a fiery, tortured spirit, aiming at something greater than could be conceived by anything that was bound up with the flesh. I had a fleeting glimpse of a pursuit of the ineffable. I looked at the man before me, in his shabby clothes, with his great nose and shining eyes, his red beard and untidy hair, and I had a strange sensation that it was only an envelope, and I was in the presence of a disembodied spirit. Let us go and look at your pictures, I said. I did not know why Strickland had suddenly offered to show them to me. I welcomed the opportunity. A man's work reveals him. In social intercourse, he gives you the surface that he wishes the world to accept, and you can only gain a true knowledge of him by inferences from little actions, of which he is unconscious, and from fleeting expressions, which cross his face unknown to him. Sometimes people carry to such perfection the mask they have assumed that in due course, they actually become the person they seem. But in his book or his picture, the real man delivers himself defenseless. His pretentiousness will only expose his vacuity. The laugh painted to look like iron is seen to be but a laugh. No affectation of peculiarity can conceal a commonplace mind. To the acute observer, no one can produce the most casual work without disclosing the innermost secrets of his soul. As I walked up the endless stairs of the house in which Strickland lived, I confess that I was a little excited. It seemed to me that I was on the threshold of a surprising adventure. I looked about the room with curiosity. It was even smaller and more bare than I remembered it. I wondered what those friends of mine would say who demanded vast studios, and vowed they could not work unless all the conditions were to their liking. "You'd better stand there," he said, pointing to a spot from which, presumably, he fancied I could see to best advantage what he had to show me. "You don't want me to talk, I suppose," I said. "No, blast you. I want you to hold your tongue." He placed a picture on the easel, and let me look at it for a minute or two, then took it down and put another in its place. I think he showed me about 30 canvases. It was the result of the 6 years during which he had been painting. He had never sold a picture. The canvases were of different sizes. The smaller were pictures of still life, and the largest were landscapes. There were about half a dozen portraits. "That is the lot," he said at last. I wish I could say that I recognized at once their beauty and their great originality. Now that I have seen many of them again, and the rest are familiar to me in reproductions, I am astonished that at first sight I was bitterly disappointed. I felt nothing of the peculiar thrill which it is the property of art to give. The impression that Strickland's pictures gave me was disconcerting, and the fact remains, always to reproach me, that I never even thought of buying any. I missed a wonderful chance. Most of them have found their way into museums, and the rest are the treasured possessions of wealthy amateurs. I try to find excuses for myself. I think that my taste is good, but I am conscious that it has no originality. I know very little about painting, and I wander along trails that others have blazed for me. At that time, I had the greatest admiration for the Impressionists. I longed to possess a Sisley and a Degas, and I worshipped Manet. His Olympia seemed to me the greatest picture of modern times, and Luc Desgenais, Sir Elherb, moved me profoundly. These works seemed to me the last word in painting. I will not describe the pictures that Strickland showed me. Descriptions of pictures are always dull, and these, besides, are familiar to all who take an interest in such things. Now that his influence has so enormously affected modern painting, now that others have charted the country, which he was among the first to explore, Strickland's pictures, seen for the first time, would find a mind more prepared for them. But it must be remembered that I had never seen anything of the sort. First of all, I was taken aback by what seemed to me the clumsiness of his technique. Accustomed to the drawing of the old masters, and convinced that Ingres was the greatest draftsman of recent times, I thought that Strickland drew very badly. I knew nothing of the simplification at which he aimed. I remembered a still life of oranges on a plate, and I was bothered because the plate was not round and the oranges were lopsided. The portraits were a little larger than life-size, and this gave them an ungainly look. To my eyes, the faces looked like caricatures. They were painted in a way that was entirely new to me. The landscape puzzled me even more. There were 2 or 3 pictures of the forest at Fontainebleau and several streets in Paris. My first feeling was that they might have been painted by a drunken cab driver. I was perfectly bewildered. The color seemed to me extraordinarily crude. It passed through my mind that the whole thing was a stupendous, incomprehensible farce. Now that I look back, I am more than ever impressed by Strove's acuteness. He saw from the first that here was a revolution in art, and he recognized in its beginnings the genius which now all the world allows. But if I was puzzled and disconcerted, I was not unimpressed. Even I, in my colossal ignorance, could not but feel that here, trying to express itself, was real power. I was excited and interested. I felt that these pictures had something to say to me that was very important for me to know, but I could not tell what it was. They seemed to me ugly, but they suggested without disclosing a secret of momentous significance. They were strangely tantalizing. They gave me an emotion that I could not analyze. They said something that words were powerless to utter. I fancy that Strickland saw vaguely some spiritual meaning in material things that was so strange that he could only suggest it with halting symbols. It was as though he found in the chaos of the universe a new pattern, and were attempting clumsily, with anguish of soul, to set it down. I saw a tormented spirit striving for the release of expression. I turned to him. "I wonder if you haven't mistaken your medium," I said. "What the hell do you mean?" "I think you're trying to say something. I don't quite know what it is, but I'm not sure that the best way of saying it is by means of painting. When I imagined that on seeing his pictures I should get a clue to the understanding of his strange character, I was mistaken. They merely increased the astonishment with which he filled me. I was more at sea than ever. The only thing that seemed clear to me, and perhaps even this was fanciful, was that he was passionately striving for liberation from some power that held him. But what the power was and what line the liberation would take remained obscure. Each one of us is alone in the world. He is shut in a tower of brass and can communicate with his fellows only by signs, and the signs have no common value, so that their sense is vague and uncertain. We seek pitifully to convey to our fellows the treasures of our heart, but they have not the power to accept them, and so we go lonely, side by side but not together, unable to know our fellows and unknown by them. We are like people living in a country whose language they know so little that, with all manner of beautiful and profound things to say, they are condemned to the banalities of the conversation manual. Their brain is seething with ideas, and they can only tell you that the umbrella of the gardener's aunt is in the house. The final impression I received was of a prodigious effort to express some state of the soul, and in this effect, I fancied, must be sought the explanation of what so utterly perplexed me. It was evident that colors and forms had a significance for Strickland that was peculiar to himself. He was under an intolerable necessity to convey something that he felt, and he created them with that intention alone. He did not hesitate to simplify or to distort if he could get nearer to that unknown thing he sought. Facts were nothing to him, for beneath the mass of irrelevant incidents, he looked for something significant to himself. It was as though he had become aware of the soul of the universe and were compelled to express it. Though these pictures confused and puzzled me, I could not be unmoved by the emotion that was patent in them, and, I knew not why, I felt in myself a feeling that with regard to Strickland was the last I had ever expected to experience. I felt an overwhelming compassion. "I think I know now why you surrendered to your feeling for Blanche Stroeve," I said to him. "Why? I think your courage failed. The weakness of your body communicated itself to your soul. I do not know what infinite yearning possesses you, so that you are driven to a perilous, lonely search for some goal where you expect to find a final release from the spirit that torments you. I see you as the eternal pilgrim to some shrine that perhaps does not exist. I do not know at what inscrutable nirvana you aim. Do you know yourself? Perhaps it is truth and freedom that you seek, and for a moment you thought that you might find release in love. I think your tired soul sought rest in a woman's arms, and when you found no rest there you hated her. You had no pity for her, because you have no pity for yourself, and you killed her out of fear, because you trembled still at the danger you had barely escaped." He smiled dryly and pulled his beard. "You are a dreadful sentimentalist, my poor friend." A week later I heard by chance that Strickland had gone to Marseilles. I never saw him again. The Moon and Sixpence Ⅲ looking back, I realized that what I have written about Charles Strickland must seem very unsatisfactory. I have given incidents that came to my knowledge, but they remain obscure because I do not know the reason that led to them. The strangest, Strickland's determination to become a painter, seems to be arbitrary, and though it must have had causes in the circumstances of his life, I am ignorant of them. From his own conversation, I was able to glean nothing. If I were writing a novel, rather than narrating such facts as I know of a curious personality, I should have invented much to account for this change of heart. I think I should have shown a strong vocation in boyhood, crushed by the will of his father or sacrificed to the necessity of earning a living. I should have pictured him impatient of the restraints of life, and in the struggle between his passion for art and the duties of his station, I could have aroused sympathy for him. I should so have made him a more imposing figure. Perhaps it would have been possible to see in him a new Prometheus. There was here, maybe, the opportunity for a modern version of the hero who, for the good of mankind, exposes himself to the agonies of the damned. It is always a moving subject. On the other hand, I might have found his motives in the influence of the marriage relation. There are a dozen ways in which this might be managed. A latent gift might reveal itself on acquaintance with the painters and writers whose society his wife sought, or domestic incompatibility might turn him upon himself. A love affair might fan in a bright flame of fire, which I could have shown smoldering dimly in his heart. I think then I should have drawn Mrs. Strickland quite differently. I should have abandoned the facts and made her a nagging, tiresome woman, or else a bigoted one with no sympathy for the claims of the spirit. I should have made Strickland's marriage a long torment from which escape was the only possible issue. I think I should have emphasized his patience with the unsuitable mate, and the compassion which made him unwilling to throw off the yoke that oppressed him. I should certainly have eliminated the children. An effective story might also have been made by bringing him into contact with some old painter whom the pressure of want or the desire for commercial success had made false to the genius of his youth, and who, seeing in Strickland the possibilities which himself had wasted, influenced him to forsake all and follow the divine tyranny of art. I think there would have been something ironic in the picture of the successful old man, rich and honored, living in another the life which he, though knowing it was the better part, had not had the strength to pursue. The facts are much duller. Strickland, a boy fresh from school, went into a broker's office without any feeling of distaste. Until he married, he led the ordinary life of his fellows, gambling mildly on the exchange, interested to the extent of a sovereign or two on the result of the Derby or the Oxford and Cambridge race. I think he boxed a little in his spare time. On his chimney piece, he had photographs of Mrs. Langtry and Mary Anderson. He read Punch and the Sporting Times. He went to dances in Hampstead. It matters less that for so long I should have lost sight of him. The years during which he was struggling to acquire proficiency in a difficult art were monotonous, and I did not know that there was anything significant in the shifts to which he was put to earn enough money to keep him. An account of them would be an account of the things he had seen happen to other people. I did not think they had any effect on his own character. He must have acquired experiences which would form abundant material for a picaresque novel of modern Paris. But he remained aloof, and judging from his conversation, there was nothing in those years that had made a particular impression on him. Perhaps when he went to Paris, he was too old to fall a victim to the glamour of his environment. Strange as it may seem, he always appeared to me not only practical, but immensely matter-of-fact. I suppose his life during this period was romantic, but he certainly saw no romance in it. It may be that in order to realize the romance of life, you must have something of the actor in you, and, capable of standing outside yourself, you must be able to watch your actions with an interest at once detached and absorbed. But no one was more single-minded than Strickland. I never knew anyone who was less self-conscious. But it is unfortunate that I can give no description of the arduous steps by which he reached such mastery over his art as he ever acquired. For if I could show him undaunted by failure, by an unceasing effort of courage holding despair at bay, doggedly persistent in the face of self-doubt, which is the artist's bitterest enemy, I might excite some sympathy for a personality, which, I am all too conscious, must appear singularly devoid of charm. But I have nothing to go on. I never once saw Strickland at work, nor do I know that anyone else did. He kept the secret of his struggles to himself. If in the loneliness of his studio he wrestled desperately with the angel of the Lord, he never allowed a soul to divine his anguish. When I come to his connection with Blanche Stroeve, I am exasperated by the fragmentariness of the facts at my disposal. To give my story coherence, I should describe the progress of their tragic union, but I know nothing of the 3 months during which they lived together. I do not know how they got on or what they talked about. After all, there are 24 hours in the day, and the summits of emotion can only be reached at rare intervals. I can only imagine how they passed the rest of the time. While the light lasted, and so long as Blanche's strength endured, I suppose that Strickland painted, and it must have irritated her when she saw him absorbed in his work. As a mistress, she did not then exist for him, but only as a model, and then there were long hours in which they lived side by side in silence. It must have frightened her. When Strickland suggested that in her surrender to him there was a sense of triumph over Dirk Stroeve because he had come to her help in her extremity, he opened the door to many a dark conjecture. I hope it was not true. It seems to me rather horrible. But who can fathom the subtleties of the human heart? Certainly not those who expect from it only decorous sentiments and normal emotions. When Blanche saw that, notwithstanding his moments of passion, Strickland remained aloof, she must have been filled with dismay, and even in those moments I surmised that she realized that to him she was not an individual, but an instrument of pleasure. He was a stranger still, as she tried to bind him to herself with pathetic arts. She strove to ensnare him with comfort, and would not see that comfort meant nothing to him. She was at pains to get him the things to eat that he liked, and would not see that he was indifferent to food. She was afraid to leave him alone. She pursued him with attentions, and when his passion was dormant, sought to excite it, for then at least she had the illusion of holding him. Perhaps she knew with her intelligence that the chain she forged only aroused his instinct of destruction, as the plate-glass window makes your fingers itch for half a brick. But her heart, incapable of reason, made her continue on a course she knew was fatal. She must have been very unhappy, but the blindness of love led her to believe what she wanted to be true, and her love was so great that it seemed impossible to her that it should not in return awake an equal love. But my study of Strickland's character suffers from a graver defect than my ignorance of many facts. Because they were obvious and striking, I have written of his relations to women, and yet they were but an insignificant part of his life. It is an irony that they should so tragically have affected others. His real life consisted of dreams and of tremendously hard work. Here lies the unreality of fiction. For in men, as a rule, love is but an episode which takes its place among the other affairs of the day, and the emphasis laid on it in novels gives it an importance which is untrue to life. There are few men to whom it is the most important thing in the world, and they are not very interesting ones. Even women, with whom the subject is of paramount interest, have a contempt for them. They are flattered and excited by them. but have an uneasy feeling that they are poor creatures. But even during the brief intervals in which they are in love, men do other things which distract their minds. The trades by which they earn their living engage their attention. They are absorbed in sport. They can interest themselves in art. For the most part, they keep their various activities in various compartments, and they can pursue one to the temporary exclusion of the other. They have a faculty of concentration on that which occupies them at the moment, and it irks them if one encroaches on the other. As lovers, the difference between men and women is that women can love all day long, but men only at times. With Strickland, the sexual appetite took a very small place. It was unimportant. It was irksome. His soul aimed elsewhither. He had violent passions, and on occasion desire seized his body, so that he was driven to an orgy of lust, but he hated the instincts that robbed him of his self-possession. I think, even, he hated the inevitable partner in his debauchery. When he had regained command over himself, he shuddered at the sight of the woman he had enjoyed. His thoughts floated then serenely in the empyrean, and he felt towards her the horror that perhaps the painted butterfly, hovering about the flowers, feels for the filthy chrysalis from which it has triumphantly emerged. I suppose that art is a manifestation of the sexual instinct. It is the same emotion which is excited in the human heart by the sight of a lovely woman, the Bay of Naples under the yellow moon, and the entombment of Titian. It is possible that Strickland hated the normal release of sex because it seemed to him brutal by comparison with the satisfaction of artistic creation. It seems strange even to myself when I have described a man who was cruel, selfish, brutal, and sensual to say that he was a great idealist. The fact remains. He lived more poorly than an artisan. He worked harder. He cared nothing for those things which with most people make life gracious and beautiful. He was indifferent to money. He cared nothing about fame. You cannot praise him because he resisted the temptation to make any of those compromises with the world which most of us yield to. He had no such temptation. It never entered his head that compromise was possible. He lived in Paris more lonely than an anchorite in the deserts of Thebes. He asked nothing from his fellows except that they should leave him alone. He was single-hearted in his aim, and to pursue it he was willing to sacrifice not only himself. Many can do that, but others. He had a vision. Strickland was an odious man, but I still think he was a great one. The Moon and Sixpence live as certain importance attaches to the views on art of painters, and this is the natural place for me to set down what I know of Strickland's opinion of the great artists of the past. I am afraid I have very little worth noting. Strickland was not a conversationalist, and he had no gift for putting what he had to say in the striking phrase that the listener remembers. He had no wit. His humor, as will be seen if I have in any way succeeded in reproducing the manner of his conversation, was sardonic. His repartee was rude. He made one laugh, sometimes by speaking the truth. But this is a form of humor which gains its force only by its unusualness. It would cease to amuse if it were commonly practiced. Strickland was not, I should say, a man of great intelligence, and his views on painting were by no means out of the ordinary. I never heard him speak of those whose work had a certain analogy with his own, of Cézanne, for instance, or of Van Gogh, and I doubt very much if he had ever seen their pictures. He was not greatly interested in the Impressionists. Their technique impressed him, but I fancy that he thought their attitude commonplace. When Struve was holding forth at length on the excellence of Monet, he said, "I prefer Winterhalter." But I dare say he said it to annoy, and if he did, he certainly succeeded. I am disappointed that I cannot report any extravagances in his opinions on the old masters. There is so much in his character which is strange that I feel it would complete the picture if his views were outrageous. I feel the need to ascribe to him fantastic theories about his predecessors, and it is with a certain sense of disillusion that I confess he thought about them pretty much as does everybody else. I do not believe he knew El Greco. He had a great, but somewhat impatient admiration for Velázquez. Chardin delighted him, and Rembrandt moved him to ecstasy. He described the impression that Rembrandt made on him with a coarseness I cannot repeat. The only painter that interested him who was at all unexpected was Bruegel the Elder. I knew very little about him at that time, and Strickland had no power to explain himself. I remember what he said about him, because it was so unsatisfactory. "He's all right," said Strickland. "I bet he found a hell to paint." When later, in Vienna, I saw several of Peter Bruegel's pictures, I thought I understood why he had attracted Strickland's attention. Here, too, was a man with a vision of the world peculiar to himself. I made somewhat copious notes at the time, intending to write something about him, but I have lost them, and have now only the recollection of an emotion. He seemed to see his fellow creatures grotesquely, and he was angry with them because they were grotesque. Life was a confusion of ridiculous, sordid happenings, a fit subject for laughter, and yet it made him sorrowful to laugh. Bruegel gave me the impression of a man striving to express in one medium feelings more appropriate to expression in another, and it may be that it was the obscure consciousness of this that excited Strickland's sympathy. Perhaps both were trying to put down in pain ideas which were more suitable to literature. Strickland at this time must have been nearly 47.